deceptive aspects of it, i.e., the stagecraft that goes into hoaxing abductions and mutilations, which, by the way, I have interviewed more than a dozen people who have been on hit squads, for lack of a better word, who have abducted humans to make it look like, quote, aliens were doing it. This is not a theory. This is absolutely fact. And yet the public, through the media and the UFO subculture, really believe there are aliens abducting people, et cetera, and so on, and that they're mutilating cattle for no good reason. What people have to understand is this is all part of the psychological warfare value of the subject, to create the specter of fear so that at some point people would accept the cost in blood and treasure of an interplanetary war. Now, let me explain that again. General Douglas MacArthur, in his last address to Congress, said World War III will be interplanetary. These lunatic psychopaths who are in these super secret projects, and make no mistake about it, they are absolute psychopaths. Those folks would love to see us have a situation that they will hoax that would make 9/11 look like a picnic day. And the movie Independence Day is just sort of a script that's being put out to sort of give people a sense of it. In fact, the new trailer for the new Independence Day actually has an Army recruiting part of a logo on it, and it almost looks like a recruiting video for the U.S. Army. And they're using the official seal of the U.S. Army. It's almost unbelievable. You should look at this new trailer if you haven't seen it, for this movie Independence Day. So the script is, the narrative that they started creating in the 50s, now this is when I was born in 1955, was to create a long-term plan where we go from the Cold War to global terrorism, which you said in your testimony, Carol, if you remember. Before 9/11, we did the National Press Club event, which had hundreds of millions of people around the world who saw it, for the Disclosure Project on May 9th, 2001, and then on September 11th, 2001, we had 9/11. And this has all been manipulated by people who want to keep the fire burning and the funds flowing into these psychopathic, hungry, warmongering sectors that have really gone rogue, and they need to be exposed and stopped before it's too late.
Well, I'm so grateful, because I had tried for years to get the message out that Werner von Braun, who was my mentor, vice president of Fairchild Industries when I was a corporate manager, had shared with me when he died in 1977, that statement that I gave in the Disclosure Project, which people can see with all the testimonies that Stephen put together on disclosureproject.org. All of those testimonies are there on YouTube as well. I couldn't get it out. It was blocked. I was allowed to talk about it, seems, at different conferences because I had credentials from being a corporate manager of an aerospace company, space and missile defense consultant, and so on, to different organizations, industries, even to the Space Command intelligence community. I've addressed those people, and the Senate and House, but mostly about the fact that there is an alternative game plan that we can play, which you also go into. I know we will later. What is it that we can do instead of escalating this war game into space and this mentality? And as von Braun would say, the technology that you talk about is an extension of the mind. What are our choices? So with you putting all of this together, this is incredible for people to hear now that none of the ETs are hostile. I know we have gotten ridiculed for saying that. Could you go in a little bit more about that?
Well, what I say to people is that this is part of the big lie, is to present that there are good ones and bad ones, and we need to unite around and have this sort of interplanetary war. Ask yourself who would benefit from this Manichaean world, the military-industrial complex. The way that demagogue sees power is through fear. Fear is how you control the masses, whether it's through religious demagoguery, political demagoguery, all the different isms out there. It has nothing to do with freedom. It has to do with controlling the masses. So the ultimate way that you would control a planet would be if you had these sort of global aspirations for a militaristic planet, which they do, is to have a threat bigger than a few thousand, terrorists running around in the Middle East. You need to present a bigger problem. And so that's what they have concocted. Now, I want to talk science for a moment. I mean, I know this is, you've had a science background, Carol, and I don't want to get too arcane here, but, and not only just science, but logic. Let's say you're an interstellar capable civilization, meaning you have the technology to go from one star system to another star system, okay? You're not using, what Elon Musk is doing at SpaceX, these primitive rockets that Wernher von Braun first started using in World War II in the 1940s. This is really primitive junk. All right, you're dealing with trans-dimensional physics that go beyond the crossing point of the speed of light, and that allow for objects to move from one dimension through other dimensions from one point in space-time to another point in space-time. Let's say a star system in the Andromeda galaxy that's 2.5 million light years from here. Well, at the speed of light, it would take 2.5 million years to get here. You couldn't do it. No one's going to live 2.5 million years. So the physics behind this, by the way, are very well understood. We understand them. And have been studied at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works and my uncle's old company, Northrop Grumman, and other places for 70 years. Now, since World War II. Now, if you were to have this type of technological capability, the idea that as the lunatic fringe in the UFO subculture would present, that you would be there for 290 million years, warring alien races fighting over the planet Earth. Something right out of a science fiction book or some religious cult. Frankly, it doesn't pass the laugh test for anyone who has a scintilla of scientific knowledge. How in the world would any kind of conflict go on for more than a fraction of a second if you have technologies that enable you to go beyond the speed of light, beyond the speed of electrons and atoms? We're talking something much more powerful than a hydrogen bomb. Your level of technology, your level of understanding space and time and matter transcends the atomic level and the nuclear level, for goodness sake. So anyone who had a hostile, violent orientation, well, look, about the time we detonated the first atomic bomb at the White Sands and the first hydrogen bomb at Bikini Atoll in early 1950s, it would have all been over. It would have been point, set, match, done. So the technologies that an interstellar civilization possesses, if they were put towards violent warfare, would result in the complete elimination of an entire planet instantly. I'm not talking about a city, an entire planet. So the idea that there is some sort of a Star Wars shooting war between planetary systems out there, look, it sells great movies. It sells great science fiction. It makes for great religious cult sort of belief systems in some cults. It has no basis in science, in fact, and no evidence for it. And yet, that's what's being sold to the public. And I think that one of the problems is that no one with a scientific background is talking about what I'm discussing right now, is what would the weapon systems look like of a, quote, hostile interstellar civilization? Well, my friends, let me tell you, I said this to a colonel at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where the Roswell remains were sent. In fact, he was in that division. And he brought this issue up. I said, sir, with all due respect, Colonel Canola, given the galactically stupid things we have been doing, shooting at these objects using scalar Tesla-like electromagnetic weapons to knock them out of the sky. That's what happened at Roswell, by the way, and at other places. If they were hostile, it would have been over, point, set, match, done 60 years ago, 70 years ago. So I think that people love to have someone to hate. And so we have to look at what are the roots of this atavistic proclivity, this tendency to go back to this primitive of us versus them that has gotten us to this point, not only with fellow humans, but also now where we're trying to extrapolate that into space with life forms that are concerned about the Earth. I think it has to do with the fact that as primates, we're 98% identical to chimpanzees and gorillas. There is this tendency to be afraid of otherness and then to organize into troops and to engage in warfare, which actually chimps do. So there's this aspect of humanity that has to be transcended through higher spiritual consciousness, in my opinion, and spiritual development and rational thought. So we don't always have the default position, it's different, let's kill it. It's different, let's hate it. Whether it's gay people, whether it's black people, whether it's women, whether it's this religion or this ism or that ism. The problem with humans is that we have the default position that the otherness is something we need to hate and we need to fight and organize ultimately into organized murder around, which primates do, which is called warfare. Now, we're past the point, I think we're 100 years past the point, where we needed to have large-scale war on this planet. We shouldn't have had World War I and World War II. We certainly don't want World War III, and we certainly don't want an interplanetary conflict. Now, the only way we're going to avert that is a genuine spiritual awakening, but also an expose of the manipulative people who want to put information out there that is false, disinformation, and that is designed to hit all the hot buttons of fear that result in people hating someone who is other, different than them. And this is something that, as an emergency and trauma doctor, I would see people come in over the most trivial things where the guns and knives would come out because of some small conflict. Well, those were tragedies, and I would help save their lives, and many times I did. However, now when we're talking with nuclear weapons, and beyond that, in the classified USAP world, scalar weapons that are longitudinal, scalar weapons that go at multiples of the speed of light, which we can get into if you like. Those systems were developed by humans way back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s also, and began to be experimented with. Those weapons can't be allowed to go into space any further or be used in open warfare. But they have been used. This is the whole point. There has been years where they've already been used to target these extraterrestrial vehicles. That's how we have managed to down so many of them. And I have worked with many people who have been in these covert programs where they have targeted extraterrestrial vehicles and been able to hit them and bring them down. Now, it doesn't happen every day, but when it does happen, it's a terrible tragedy. And in my briefing to General Patrick Hughes, who is the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which, by the way, is almost as big as the CIA. It's the in-house military intelligence and analyst group within the Pentagon. The man who is the director of that, he tried to get to the bottom of what was going on with these USAPs, and he was basically brushed off. So I was brought in to provide the briefing with one of my military advisors and someone who had worked with Eisenhower in the White House, who was an elderly lawyer at this time. And at this meeting, what was interesting is that he said, before I got into this command, I couldn't have believed any of this is true. He says, and now that I'm sitting in this chair, I know it's true. That there is a group of people who have this kind of knowledge and technology who are running amok. He says, but I don't have access to them, even though I'm the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And the same thing was said to me by the head of the CIA, and the same thing was said to me by the man who is the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J2, Admiral Tom Wilson. So at a certain point, you begin to realize that this problem has to be corrected by the people. How are we going to fix it?